I've been a GP working in Penticton for the past 30 years. I've recently had to retire. In the past 17 years, I've treated hundreds of patients for alcohol use disorder using a different approach than the one I had learned in medical school.
This is all I've got to offer my brother now, is that he will leave some kind of legacy in terms of breaking some of this shame and stigma. And if someone else can benefit from that, it's the thing he would want the most. It's torture to have to live with that all by yourself. It's torture, and you could see it in his body, and it's completely preventable.
When I went through medical school, I was taught that alcohol use disorder, alcoholism, was caused by people's moral failing, weak character, bad judgment, bad choices.
Through my career, I'd worked in emergency both as a frontline clinician as well as a leader, and certainly watched patients come in with their families, and you could see over time as they presented that they were, the deterioration and struggles they were facing physically, mentally, as well as socially. So you really watched heartache coming in, and we were really struggled with what to offer them.
Because of course he had no idea about medications that can mitigate that withdrawal, supports, what that looks like. I don't think that he had any picture of what a life without alcohol would look like, and I don't think he had any concept at all of how he would actually get there.
When AA was founded in 1934 by Bill W. and his colleague, it was a miracle. It was a life-saving miracle. It banded together a group of like-minded people who were able to at least identify the problem and speak about it publicly and persuasively and support one another. But now we understand the brain so much better, and people are more in tune with that kind of an evidence-based approach.
It's one thing to promote a program, because obviously AA and A and those programs, they do a marvelous job for a lot of people, but not for everybody. So again, all that matters is what works. And effectiveness is a measure of truth.
He was profoundly ashamed of his addiction. To the point that he actually was willing to die alone in his bed and not even tell his family. He phoned my mom. My mom's elderly. He would phone her every night at 6:30 and have a conversation about a fictional day. So we learned that he had been fired from his job 2 years ago.
I would say stigma in general is probably the biggest challenge that we struggle with for, or the people that are have substance use disorder struggle with, and even for those working in the field. Sometimes we talk about stigma by proxy. Even within the mental health and substance use field, there's a lot of stigma attached even to accessing services related to mental health and substance use.
We're treating people with alcohol use disorder like we used to treat people with leprosy. We didn't understand it. It was frightening. We worried that we might become one of those. How did they ever get so bad and so sick and so disfigured and hopeless? And it's a similar way that we treat people with alcohol use disorder. We try and stay away from them, we shun them, we don't understand it.
If you go into your GP, general practitioner, and say, identified as a person with alcohol use disorder, the chance that you will get an appropriate medication is less than 1%.
We have our hand on our hip, and we describe, we sort of indicate, yes, this is very serious, and it's too bad you find yourself in this position, but it's, it's kind of your own fault, a little bit of that, and really, how could you?
And so I think part of the reason that I wanted to do this interview is that I have so much respect for the work that Dr. Harries has been doing to treat this as a medical issue. There's still a lot of judgment, there's still a lot of shame, there's still so much stigma. So I think that what we decided to do as a family is not subscribe to that and not hide behind it and not write a nice obituary that doesn't speak to what he died from. He died from alcohol use disorder, and we need to be able to say that.
I had read an article in The Lancet in, looking back, it was 2003, and it was about a study done by an American researcher, and it showed that a number of people who were alcoholics benefited from taking a medication called topiramate.
I started the medication and right after quit using alcohol. It was instant. Like the same day.
So I think what has happened over the last few years, people like Dr. Harris has been able to give us a number of drugs as options so that we can supply clients with the list. He's drawn up a list with the side effects, with the dosages.
Medication for alcohol use disorder, the right medication, is one of the true miracles of modern science. There aren't many illnesses that are this responsive to pharmacotherapy. This is one of them.
When you tease out the different ways that people have experienced alcohol, how they experience not having alcohol, how they feel. Some people are anxious, some people are angry, some people are agitated. Some people begin drinking when they're 13 years old and it grabs a hold of them very quickly. Other people don't seem to have any problem with alcohol until they retire or have some life event, some traumatic life event. Whatever their personal sort of story is, you can glean bits of that will help you understand which of the meds that they would need.
2 years ago, I got home from Mexico and I just got drinking more and more. And then last summer, I got dumped. Just sort of pushed me over the edge. I kind of went extreme. I was drinking a lot. I'm not a very big person, and I was drinking a box of wine a day. Yeah.
I definitely had a bias around a pill can just fix this. And wait a minute, Jeff. You mean after a few days their brain starts to heal and they feel better, and tell me again they don't want to drink?
Yeah, I don't want to drink anymore. Just don't have that feeling. No side effects at all from it. Not from day one.
And eventually it took away all the cravings. Everything associated with withdrawal and cravings. Gave me the ability to move forward with my life in all aspects.
People can see the difference in his life. He's very cultural, very spiritual, back to his roots. He's hunting, he's fishing, he's serving his people like the elders used to do.
I moved from a skeptic to somebody who's willing to, absolutely advocate for the combination of medicines and the treatment protocols.
He struggled with it. I mean, he's for 30 years now. And the last 5 years, he's just gone shoo.
There's such a disconnect between what the science is telling us and what's actually being used on the ground, that it's a huge chasm of ignorance.
And the other thing is, everyone we've gone to see and trying to find help for him, it's like, you just got to let him fall. You're enabling him. Well, they're not the ones who have picked him up off the beach. Completely unable to take care of himself.
Most of our calls for service are related to alcohol. We didn't have a lot of tools. We would bring them in, and a lot of it's still the same today. You bring them in, you sober them out. You certainly can't release them until they're sober.
We've always supported him psychologically, tried to be there, but we've had to completely support him for the last 5 years. He'll feel, the guilt and the worthlessness, and so then he'll drink. And then he doesn't care. He wishes he were not here.
And he'll say that. He says, I just don't care. I just want to die.
One of the challenges that I faced is if this research has been known since the 90s, why hasn't there been any uptake?
To my knowledge, there's no medical school in Canada that teaches us 6 medications that can help with people, depending on both the combination of their genetics and their history. So they don't all work for everybody, but something will work for nearly everybody. And they just aren't taught that. So it's kind of, how could you know, right? Like as a resident, how would you know? You're not being taught it. I mean, there's a level of ignorance, but we're all paying for it.
So knowledge translation is a term that is used where research moves into practice. So it's able to, as studies are being created, it's really important that they show reliable effects and they're valid effects. And once that is, there's confidence that happens, then that is moved into practice.
The Mayo Clinic has done some good work in a recent article that's suggesting that there's some, that this is an approach that should be used. They're a very well-respected organization. And so beginning to pick up some of the mainstream players that get an understanding of it.
It's well known that from the research that happens as benchmark research, for it to really get into practice takes about 15 years.
The number needed to treat, which is how many people do we need to treat in order to assure the effect that the medication is supposed to be providing. The number needed to treat on some of these is 2.
One family I can think of was that their son would always ride to our office and would pick up the phone outside and talk to the dispatcher and say that his mom and dad were fighting. So we would go there and we would deal with it, and always it was alcohol. And when I came back in 2000, that boy who used to ride his bicycle was in our jail doing time for domestic violence. So you can see, if we had been able to somehow deal with the alcohol problems that his parents were experiencing, we may have been able to prevent, what happened to him.
So that's called failure demand. So the idea that we're creating demand in one place by failing to do something, it's showing up in another place. And so the idea that much of, I think, the treatment of alcohol use disorder is actually failure demand, because we have solutions that are known and proven to work and we're not applying it. So the demand, and that includes the demand not just at the hospitals, but if you look at the court system, that was the inability to do something in a different way at a different place that would have resolved, you wouldn't have the demand showing up in the court system. And there's a good estimate of it that in healthcare, the failure demand represents about 50% of total demand.
Half of the people who are homeless are alcoholics, and on average, if you're an alcoholic on the street, you've had your alcoholism for at least 9 years before you ended up on the street, before you blew through all your supports and family connections and everything else. And so undoubtedly they've come in contact with the police and with healthcare services. They were probably never offered any of these things.
Too bad it's taken so long. Like, how many lives have been wasted without it?
Up to 40% of hospital emergency department visits are directly or indirectly related to substance use. And let's face it, the most common substance that's used is alcohol.
This study that was done that says that the cost in total is about, to the Canadian system, is about $15 billion a year.
The reason I'm involved with Dr. Harry's is because of my daughter. She's 41 years old and she's been struggling with alcohol use since she was 16. All my life, I have never allowed alcohol in my home. The only time it comes in is when I'm doing my Christmas cakes, and I so call my fruit and alcohol for a few days before I make the Christmas cake.
There's something called kindling, and it makes the more times you go through detox, the worse your symptoms become the next time you go through withdrawal. And at some point, it becomes very much a barrier for people to even try and reduce their drinking because they're too frightened of how horrible they'll feel when they do go through withdrawal and detox.
We tried several times with our daughter, and then she would go back to her pattern of drinking again, her method of coping. And the last time it happened was a couple months ago. She had a really bad, went on a really bad binge. She had to be hospitalized, and we brought her home with us for a couple weeks. And Colleen mentioned that maybe we might want to reach out to Dr. Harry's.
I think the other thing that really helped us, again, talking more with Jeff, was all the testimonials and stories that came from patients and families. When you started to hear these and the difference it made, and the difference it made in a very short period of time, was really hard to ignore.
She really likes Dr. Harry's because he doesn't make her feel guilty or ashamed that she's struggling with a disorder. She likes the term disorder rather than disease. She says, "Mom, he's so respectful." And she's just so excited that someone would do this just out of the goodness of their heart. And I don't want to get emotional. It's been hard as parents. It's intergenerational, but it skipped me. I want it to be the generation in our family that stopped it, and I haven't been able to stop it yet. We're hoping now, and she says too, well, Mom, maybe it's going to be my generation that finally stops.
And it's important to realize that this is much more than just a healthcare problem. The alcohol use disorder impacts so many other things in our society. You know, the care of families, violence. You know, our jails are full of people who are there because they committed crime while they were intoxicated or suffering the mental health issues due to substance use.
An important part of the work that he's been doing in getting this message out to his peers who simply are unaware of it.
So I just decided I'd try and do what I could in my sphere of influence locally and some provincial things to push this agenda forward. One of these 6 meds will work, and it's a matter of choosing the most likely one, and that likely will work. But if it doesn't, you don't kick the person to the side of the road and say, tough luck. You know, you wouldn't do that if someone had pneumonia. Oh, penicillin didn't work, tough shit, you know, next.
I don't think anybody is disposable. I don't think people are disposable. As long as there's a ray of hope, you shouldn't be disposable.
Hope is such an important part of them recovering. For them to have hope and for people around them to have hope.
The economic argument for treating it better, for treating it faster, treating it sooner, and treating it with evidence is incontrovertible.
What's the cost of undertreating alcohol use disorder patients? Some of those numbers we know, some we don't know, but we could get them, and most of them are unknowable. Like what's the cost of a family member who dies prematurely?
The other person I was going to tell you about was a 15-year-old young man who was in the care of Ministry of Health. And he came in because he was drinking excessively, and when he drank, he got very violent, and he was up on a number of assault charges. And he fit the pattern of this early onset alcohol use disorder to a T. And I ended up convincing him he should try this medication, and that was on it was a Friday, and he drank for 2 more days, and then slowly just didn't feel the need to drink. And he saw me on the following Thursday, and and I've had this sort of reaction by people as well. They kind of are looking around thinking they don't know why they're not drinking, but they just don't feel the need that they had days or weeks before.
One of the areas we looked at was to see if the dispensing rates for these medications were changing over time, as in they're going up. So physicians were changing their prescribing practices that led to an uptake in more of these medications that are helpful for treating AUD, whether they were being applied. And one of the main medications we tracked over an 18-month period increased by about 450%. About 1,000 patients are being treated that wouldn't have been had it stayed at the same rate.
To change behavior, you kind of need three components. You need motivation, the opportunity, and the knowledge and all of those three aspects interact with actually changing behavior.
I think with the BCCSU updating their guidelines and including these new treatments for alcohol use disorder, there's a lot of people that are taking courses that they offer. It's a go-to place for a lot of people when they're interested in working in this field. So I think that will be a really great way for the message to spread even quicker. It's a well-respected agency, so having it endorsed at that level, I think, makes a big difference as well.
Jeff was diagnosed with ALS 2 years ago, actually. And so the urgency to get this story out there has sort of accelerated a bit. And he's, I would say, tirelessly been working to get this message across to other people who are simply not aware of it.
This is the positive outcome of that medication, is my son's life. Thank you for giving my son back.